Hey guys, this is Standing for Truth. We are live. I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're going to have a blast today. I've been looking forward to this. This is the much anticipated second debate between Taylor, aka Snake Was Right, and Dr. Kent Hovind. So I want to start off by thanking both these men for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us and give us this great debate. Today's debate will be on whether or not evolutionary mechanisms have limits. So I've got Matt Mann here, who everybody is, I'm sure, is familiar with, who will be co-moderating with me and just making sure this debate goes nice and smooth. So I'm going to hand it over to Matt to go over the format, introduce our debaters, and we will begin with Taylor. So go ahead, Matt.
All right. A lot of you probably know Taylor. He's debated Ken Hovind in the past. He goes by Snake Was Right. That is the name of his channel. He can send you a link to this after. And Ken Hovind probably needs no introduction. He's going to be the one who is going to be going second on this debate. We're going to be having 8-minute openings with a 5-minute rebuttal each, with a 22-minute discussion each, and then a 3-minute closing for each person with a 6-minute Q&A. So that was, I'm going to be giving 30-second warnings, so just listen for the sound. And that way I don't have to interrupt and butt in to say you have 30 seconds left. So I guess Snake is going first on this. And sure. I think Standing is going to be controlling the volume.
Yes, go ahead there, Snake. Start whenever you are ready. We'll start the timer on your first word. Go ahead.
All right, so I'll just explain my channel name real quick first. I call it Snake Was Right. Not as any claim that I am correct or anything like that. It's just a reference to the biblical serpent, and my belief that knowledge of good and evil was actually a good thing and not a bad thing that would result. Well, actually, no matter how bad it is, the truth is important to know, even if there are bad consequences. So I think in that instance, the snake was right. And so the biblical serpent is one of my literary heroes. And so we'll just jump into the science. I'm studying biology, molecular biology at CU Boulder in Colorado. And the topic today is about whether the mechanisms of evolution have a limit. And so we've gotten to this point over the history of creation where they're essentially backed into a corner, it seems, with because they have been forced to accept microevolution but not macroevolution. And so they do accept all the mechanisms that lead to variation within kind, they say, but it remains to be seen what the limit of a kind is or where they draw that line. And I would love to discuss that. Clearly, there are limits, but it doesn't seem like they're defined by the creationist side. It seems that they just claim that the limit is a kind. And to a biologist, that doesn't really make sense because we know that the limit would be in the basically at the molecular level. You can't just break the laws of physics or chemistry. That's essentially the limit. So I think that we should just get into discussing some of those mechanisms. I think I'm going to give away most of my time here in favor of just discussion, but we'll go over some of the mechanisms just to get us started. Basically, I've heard Kent before talk about how the evolutionary process is just a selection process. It cannot create. It's not a creative process. And he gives the example that sticks in my mind is with the tallness, basically, out of a population. So he'll say things like, and correct me if I'm wrong or misrepresenting, that you can get certain traits that out of the population that already exist to basically get exaggerated. So in his example, he would say that evolution or microevolution can select for the tallest people in a population, but it cannot create new features. So I would like to correct that, because it seems that this way of looking at things ignores the mutation. Mutation does create things. It creates variation. And so evolution is not just a selective process. It creates differences, and then the selection process kicks in. And we can also talk about SFT. He and I have had several discussions about the limits of evolution, in the sense that he believes in the genomic decay, accumulation of deleterious mutations. And there are several mechanisms to that counterbalance that as well. I suspect that we'll be talking more about how do mutations actually create steps towards different kinds, but I think we should start off hearing what Kent defines as a kind, because last time we talked, I showed him the ring species, and according to his definition, according to my understanding of his definition, a kind is that which brings forth. And so I gave him an example of several salamander species which can bring forth with each other until, except for 2 of the species that can't bring forth with each other. So therefore, they are not the same kind, and yet he is still able to recognize that they are all salamanders based on their phenotype and I'm assuming their genotype. So it would seem that we're actually not work definition that has anything to do with reproduction, and more based on anatomical features. So I think I will concede the rest of my time at that.
Okay, you stopped 3 minutes early, so I guess we can move that into Q&A for later. All right, and Kent, whenever you're ready.
All right, I guess we got 8 minutes for the opening. If I get my timer here. Thank you so much, and it's Taylor. I appreciate you trying to defend what you believe. I think we'll be able to get you converted if you're honest and open, and you become an independent Baptist one of these days, and a Bible believer. So the debate topic is: do the proposed mechanisms of evolution have any limits? We have to define some of these words. First of all, what are the mechanisms? So just the word mechanism has to do with a machine. Anybody would tell you any machine has to have a designer. There are no machines anywhere that I'm aware of that came without a designer of some kind. Whether they're natural machines like trees that can pump water up to the leaves, which is amazing that they can, without having a heart or a pump, they can draw water up with capillary action and with root pressure and with transpiration, can get water 350 feet in the air off the ground. I mean, that's quite a pump to pump. And it's an amazing mechanism that allows trees to do that. There are quite a few mechanisms in the biological world, like your heart would be considered a mechanism to be able to pump blood around your body, which is stunning in its complexity. Ask any heart surgeon, you know, how stunning, how amazing is the heart? And I think anybody with one eye and half a brain would tell you it's beyond comprehension in its complexity. So we have lots of mechanisms in our shop, for instance, which I'm in the shop now, next to our shop. We have all kinds of tools to work on these mechanisms because they don't fix themselves. So what is the mechanism for evolution? And this word evolution has to be carefully defined. This seems to be where Taylor is hung up on what exactly, you know, they'll say, he said, for instance, that the creationists, assuming he's meaning me, are backed into a corner by accepting microevolution. Absolutely not. I accept the obvious fact that animals can produce a variety. There is no question. There are, I think, 60 recognized breeds of chickens now that probably had a common ancestor called a chicken. So certainly there are variations within the kind. I don't think we should call it microevolution. I have always said for 30 years now, I think it's a lousy term. However, that's the term they use, so I'll explain it. But microevolution is a variation of the same kind of animal. Like we talked about taller people and shorter people. Sure, that's a variation of people. There are no exceptions where any human has ever produced anything other than a human. Or no dog's ever produced anything other than a dog. And the evolutionists, I'm stunned now that they don't see the stupidity of what they're saying. They're saying, of course, evolution predicts dogs will always produce dogs. I say, wait a minute. You believe somewhere in the past something non-dog produced a dog. I mean, if it came from an amoeba, hello, that's a non-dog. So why can it happen in the past? It can't happen where we can watch it and observe it. Science deals with things we can observe, study, test, and demonstrate. Evolution is none of those. So does it have any limits? Well, here is what the Wikipedia or Berkeley University's just on Internet today. I said, what is the mechanism of evolution? They said, well, there are 4 mechanisms, 4 things that make it happen. One is mutation, then migration or gene flow, then genetic drift, and natural selection as mechanisms of change, from khanacademy.org. How variation, differential reproduction, and hereditary result in evolution by natural selection. Here it is from bifi.es, NUCTUNT. I don't know if you can read my screen there or not, but what are the 4 mechanisms of evolution? Allele frequencies in a population may change due to 4 fundamental forces of evolution: natural selection, genetic drift, mutations, and gene flow, the same one given on the Berkeley website. This seems to be the teaching, is you guys believe that your fairy tale, your religion of evolution will somehow be true because of these 4 things. I would start off and concede right away, natural selection works. A, it is natural, and it's a selection process. It's not a creation process. Your argument a minute ago that the mutation provides the new material, and now natural selection can act on it. I think we can demonstrate that has never been observed. Never. That is a religion. It's SpongeBob imagination stuff. And if you want to believe it, fine. But don't force that on all the kids to learn that stuff, these innocent minds that are going thinking they're going to learn science, and instead they learn a religion of evolution. I agree natural selection works, but it selects. That's all it does. And I've given the illustration, and nobody's ever refuted it. If I decided I want to select a population of people over 7 feet tall, so I go through and I kill everybody in the world who's under 7 feet tall. Only those who are 7 and over can reproduce now because they're the only ones alive. And many of their children will grow up to be very tall. But if they don't, we kill them, okay? After 5 or 6 or 10 generations of doing that, we would have a whole population of people over 7 feet tall. No question, that can be done. That's what farmers do. They select for cows that give more milk. And after about 8 or 10 generations, all the cows give more milk than normal. However, the cows are weaker. They couldn't survive in the wild, but the farmer does have a herd of cows that gives more milk or more beef or more heat resistance or whatever they're selecting for. That's artificial selection, but it's the same concept. Nature would select certain animals to survive in certain environments, just by either by temperature. For example, the dogs in Alaska generally have long hair and have thicker bodies and shorter legs to conserve heat. Whereas the dogs in the dingoes in Australia have real thin hair, have skinny bodies, long legs to get away from the desert, and they get rid of the heat faster. The dingoes can handle the heat, but they could never handle Alaska. They'd freeze first winter. And the wolves and the huskies up in Alaska would die of heat stroke in the Australian outback desert. So nature has selected those 2 varieties of dogs to survive in that particular environment. That's not a creative process. The dogs already had hair. It just decided, is it going to be long hair or short hair? It didn't create a furnace or a heating system or a coal burning stove. It's just hair. So all it did, nature selected long hair or short hair, and that happens. I agree. But that's where it stops. It's not a creative process at all. Mutations now, if you think mutations are going to help, I think you're dreaming. No mutation has ever been observed that makes the creature better off. I use the illustration. Well, the textbooks are going to say natural selection is observed. Of course, natural selection is observed. Nature selects. We could select dogs to get them smaller and smaller and smaller, and eventually end up with a completely useless dog like a Chihuahua. But it's still a dog. Still in the, what kind is yours? A Yorkie? Yorkie. You have the Chihuahua, okay. How long would that last in the woods, in nature? 30 minutes, right? Okay, man has selected smaller and smaller dogs to have them for a lap dog or a companion or whatever. They will never get a dog as small as a flea. There is a limit. There are animals as small as a flea, like a flea. They'll never get a dog as big as an elephant, even though there are mammals as big as an elephant, like an elephant. So nature selects, but it's always the same kind. But in the evolution fairy tale, they say the first true cells slowly evolved into humans. The protozoa gradually became a human.
Time.
If the protozoa, time's up. Anyway, I think natural selection works, but that's all it does is select. It doesn't create a thing. Okay, sorry about that.
Would you be able to, in between this, zoom the camera back that we can't see your screen all the way?
Oh, Steve, did you hear that? Zoom the camera back. They can't see the screen all the way.
I'm pretty sure they can.
No,
I can't. Right there.
there we go. Okay, looks good. Looks perfect.
Okay. All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that opening, Dr. Hovind and Taylor. So now we're going to move into the rebuttal period with Taylor. I believe is it 5 minutes there, Matt?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Taylor.
Okay, so you are correct when you say natural selection only selects, but
Good.
Natural selection is not the entire process of evolution. In fact, the clip you showed up there said, quote, mutations are the ultimate source for new alleles in the population. So it seems like you are ignoring the effects that mutations have based on some nebulous wording of adding information. And you say, we have never observed mutation adding information, and that's just patently untrue. It's called a duplication event, and we observe them all the time. Now, this is new physical information. Even just like if you have two identical chairs and you add a third, that is new, and that is a new chair. And then if you start changing the parts of the chair, that is a different chair. So that's exactly what happens in mutation. Some genes are duplicated and then changed. Some genes are just duplicated. Some genes that exist are not duplicated and changed. And these are all examples of different information. Now, I suspect that Kent is going to go in and say that this is not an example of new information because of the way he defines information. And I don't know how else to explain it, but if you change the sequence of something, the information is different. And if you add more of it, that is adding information. It doesn't matter. You can 10,000 Bibles. If you add one more Bible, that's adding another Bible. That's adding information. Now, it's not new information, and that's where mutation comes in. Mutations are adding new information because they are altering the sequence of information. I suspect we will have a nice back and forth about that, but that's my correction so far. And I still notice you haven't really defined a kind. Is it based on reproduction or is it based on body type? And you seem to be indicating the latter because you say, when you're talking about size of an animal, you say that's where it stops. I'm not sure how you know that's when it stops, other than you just kind of feel like it. So, like, the question I would pose to you, couldn't a dog, for example, become bear-like? Or and to illustrate this, I would ask also, if one type of dog could no longer reproduce with the other types of dogs, does this indicate a big enough change in kind to equal macroevolution? It seems like you don't want to define your goalposts so that we can't meet them. So you just say it stops at kind. You don't define kind. But then the reason I say you've been backed into a corner is because you've already admitted that these changes occur at the genetic level, which produce a change in the phenotypes. And this is going to be a major sticking point for me. Natural selection only selects. But when you say that, you are ignoring the effects of mutation. So mutations will produce different alleles. So you have different information to select from. Different information is for each selection event. This is not just selection, it is an interaction between selection and differentiation. And therefore, that's where complexity emerges. And it seems almost intelligent because it is selecting, but it's selecting the best configurations. And it was also claimed that there are no beneficial mutations at all, and that's simply false. The best example of that is with drug-resistant bacteria. And before you get to the claim that in a new gene that confers drug resistance to the bacteria, it's been claimed by creationists that this then inherently lowers the fitness of the bacteria natural environment. I have several experiments here that witness mutations fixing essentially that lower fitness conferred by the drug resistance, and we also witness the staph, for example, is actually surviving better in its wild population after evolving a drug resistance. So those claims are all simply false, and we have direct observation of that both in the wild and the laboratory. So I think we should discuss more on what information means. Did you say time? Okay.
Yeah. All right. And I'll start the time when you start talking, Ken.
All right. Well, thank you so much. He's got several things on the table here. If a dog can no longer produce with another dog, probably I would guess there are mechanical limits where the Chihuahua cannot reproduce with the Great Dane. Maybe there aren't. I don't know. But it's still a dog, and I think it's intuitive, but obviously it's still a dog. And you said, I don't define kind. Well, the Bible says in the original creation, those that could, the kinds would bring forth. And so I don't know that there can't be variations that would make them incapable of bringing forth, like, for instance, the dogs with the Chihuahua and the Great Dane. But it's still obviously a dog. I would point out, though, Taylor, that I'm not asking for my belief to be taught at taxpayer expense in the schools. You guys are demanding that everybody pay for your religion to be taught. You guys should go start private schools and teach evolution to anybody that wants to pay and come learn it and get it out of the public schools. It's not science. Nobody's ever seen it. You said the best example you know of is drug-resistant bacteria. For heaven's sake, son, it's still a bacteria. Do you think that process of a bacteria becoming resistant to drugs, it's still a bacteria, do you think that process could turn a bacteria to an elephant or a whale or a human? I cannot comprehend how somebody cannot see the folly of that belief that this variation within a bacteria is going to produce a whale out of the bacteria if we give it enough time. I know you guys count on this, billions of years being the solution to everything. And I cover many ways in my seminar to take away the billions of years. It cannot be billions of years old, but that's not this debate. Are the mechanisms that are supposedly driving evolution, are they limited? Of course they're limited. They're limited physically, obviously. They're never going to get an elephant as big as Texas or the United States. There are physical limits there. I think every evolutionist I've talked to would admit that. Of course, there are some limits. They don't like to go there because they know it's starting to paint them into a corner. Are there limits based on size? Are there limits based upon food availability? Are there limits based upon heat resistance, heat tolerance, let's say? Sure. The dogs, if you took all the dogs in the world, turned them loose into Alaska, go back in 5 years, the only survivors are the husky type body, thick fur, etc. Nature selected them to survive. But they're never going to survive at 200 below zero. Nothing would survive. There are limits. They might be able to survive at 40 below zero, Alaska temperatures, but they're not going to survive at 200 or 300 or 400 below zero Fahrenheit. They're not going to happen. There are limits. The dingoes in Australia can survive at 130 degrees. It's pretty amazing. But they can't survive at 500 degrees or 10,000 degrees or 2 trillion degrees. There is a limit. So there are limits to all these things that I think are just obvious to anybody. Secondly, I would point out, science deals with things we can observe, study, test, and demonstrate. Nobody observes or has ever observed a bacteria produce a non-bacteria. The bacteria that is resistant to drugs is still a bacteria that didn't change into any other life form. So the variations happen, but they're limited by all sorts of things. They're limited by genetics. No new information is ever added. You said if you had 10,000 Bibles and added another Bible, you now have more Bibles. Yeah, but you don't have any new information. Then you say mutations are going to fix this. That's like saying if I type out a sentence enough times and make typographical errors, my typos are going to make it into a sentence with totally new meaning and typos destroy, typographical errors destroy. There are no mutations you can point to that have added information that is useful. You're counting on typographical errors in the gene code, which is incredibly complex to start with. You're counting on some kind of errors in gene transmission to create something new. I know it sounds good, and I guess theoretically it might even be possible, but it's never happened. It's not observed. It's not science. It's SpongeBob imagination stuff. And I really enjoyed listening to you guys tell about your imagination, but that's not science. I'm sorry. Staph surviving better, it's still staph, okay? So ring species, the chameleons or whatever it was that went around California are still a chameleon or still a lizard or still the same kind of animal. To a 5-year-old, they could tell you. Now, they may not be reproducing now. Okay, big deal. They're still the same kind of animal. Everybody knows that. That process of ring species is not going to turn a bacteria to a whale or an elephant or a mosquito. You're dreaming. And that's okay. I appreciate you dreaming. Stop making everybody pay for that dream to be taught in the schools. Let's see. There. Okay? My time's up. Thank you.
All right. We're going to move on to the discussion period, 22 minutes. And it'll be a back and forth. And try to make it equal time between you guys and keep it calm. All right. I'll start the timer when you guys begin. Snake, you're paused. Snake, you're muted.
Yeah. Okay. I do that. So he says that staph is still staph, and yes, but I think you're mixing goalposts here. So the goalpost I was addressing there was that it evolved a beneficial gene, not to demonstrate that bacteria has evolved into something else, but that it has evolved a beneficial gene. So maybe we should stick with that goalpost.
Well, I know you're anxious to get this word evolved into the sentence. Staph evolved a beneficial gene. Do you mean there was a mutation? Something went wrong in the genetic code and it happens to be beneficial? The staph didn't make this decision on its own, did it?
If it's beneficial, then it's not wrong.
Okay, so the staph has become resistant to a certain... what exactly happened with the staph that you think was beneficial?
It is drug resistant.
And is it indeed stronger in the regular population of other like kinds?
Yes, it is flourishing in hospitals, and it's a really bad problem because it is flourishing more than the non-resistant staph.
So if it's flourishing in hospitals, where of course they have all kinds of antibiotics and stuff going around, are you trying to claim that it would then be flourishing in the wild? Hospitals
that is the wild.
The hospital is the wild?
Yes. A human body is the wild for pathogens.
So you don't think you have a limited environment there with using the hospital as your example? And
that's the environment. That's the environment it lives in, human bodies. And it spreads very quickly inside of human buildings where there is close human contact.
So the staph becoming resistant to drugs that treat it is evidence enough for you that elephants and mosquitoes are related.
No, that's different. You see, you're mixing the goalposts here. It's evidence.
Yes,
you are. Yes, you are. It's evidence that there are beneficial mutations.
And this, what you said, was the best one you could point to.
It's a very easy one. I can point to other ones.
All right,
I can point to ones where we've actually isolated the mutation that makes it back fitness and higher fitness in the wild.
So this, what are examples besides the staph, which is not in the wild, it's in the hospital? It has a higher fitness in a hospital in human bodies that are in the hospital, where they have all kinds of bacteria and drug killing stuff going around. What is an example of something out in the natural world that has added information and made it better?
Well, what do you consider the natural world? Because the drug-resistant staph is actually spread outside of hospitals too.
Okay, would you agree that farmers all over the world, for the recorded history of the world, we have actual recorded history back maybe 4,000, 5,000 years. Do you think every farmer has ever observed cows produce cows? Has anybody seen it produce anything other than a cow? We have a bunch of cows, a herd of cows across the fence here. They produce cows. No exceptions.
So are we moving on from the goalpost of beneficial mutations? Are you admitting that beneficial mutations can happen?
No, I'm not admitting that at all. I know you keep mentioning that phrase, moving the goalpost. You guys want to move the goalpost all the time. I think the goalpost is very clear. The Bible, which came way before Charles Darwin or anybody else, said the animals will bring forth after their kind. And every farmer will tell you when he crossbreeds cows, he gets cows. It's not moving the goalpost. A cow is a cow. You might give a cow that gives more milk or more beef or heat resistance, but it's still a cow. And you can get race horses that are faster than other horses. Okay, still a horse. You're never going to turn a horse to a cow, let alone get a horse from a bacteria.
We're focusing on the mechanisms of change in evolution, and you claimed that there is no such thing as a beneficial mutation. So I'm just focusing on that goalpost alone right now. Okay.
So the beneficial mutation you want to point to is staph has become resistant to the drugs in the hospital, and therefore that is evidence enough that there is new information, you claim. I'll have to analyze that. Exactly what was different in the gene code. Is indeed the staph more viral, more lively, more likely to survive in the wild? I'm going to say I doubt that. Not in the hospital maybe, but not out in nature in the wild. Is this drug-resistant staph found any place outside of the hospital?
Yes. It's contracted by sports players quite frequently, in locker rooms and things like that. Close human contact.
Close human contact in locker rooms. Okay.
That is the wild environment of a pathogen that lives in human bodies. Is a human body. Yeah. And so places where humans interact is going to spread that.
And so this is still, you agree it's still a single-celled creature, a bacteria, right? Single-celled.
Yeah. And no other kind of phylum or genus has ever come from bacteria. That no one thinks that bacteria have evolved into eukaryotes or anything like that.
I think I can show you where the textbooks have pictures by the thousands of humans and whales and mosquitoes and all of them. They draw lines on paper back to a common ancestor, which is a single-celled protista or
not a bacteria.
Okay, a protista then. It's still a single. Are there any two-celled organisms in the world that you're aware of?
Yeah.
There are?
Mm-hmm.
I'd like some of those for my science center here. Would you send them out, please?
They found them in algae. They found single, double cell, triple cell, pretty much every number up to hundreds. And then we've observed them in the lab evolving new traits and specifically evolving multicellularity.
And you're claiming they found 2 or 3 or multi-celled creatures in the lab, right?
They found single-celled algae in the wild. And subjected them to selection pressures like predators, and they evolved multicellularity.
I'll have to investigate that. I'm going to say right now, I doubt that seriously. It might be a colony or cooperation, but it's not a two-celled organism. But to go from an amoeba or a single-celled organism to something like a whale or an elephant is going to require a whole lot more than just a cooperation of cells.
That never happens. No one thinks that happens.
It never happens. Great, you're a creationist. They had to be created.
No protist has ever produced a whale.
Do you think, I just showed you the picture where they say the protists came from the whales. I'll show you again. This is straight from the textbooks here.
You're taking it far too literally. It's not born straight from that. There are millions of intermediate steps between them.
Well, I know you imagine that there are. You believe that there are and you imagine it, but that's not safe. Here we go. Here's a textbook used by the kids in public school. Protista, single-celled, slowly turned to biology teacher. Not slowly. Well, yeah, they would say, if it happened quickly, we would all recognize it as a fairy tale. But because they say it happens slowly, then it becomes science. You guys think that millions of years is going to help. You think this example you have of a single-celled creature becoming resistant to drugs is going to help. This is what they are teaching. This is my objection, Taylor. This isn't, none of this is science. This is lines on paper. This is imagination. This is, I hope it's true. I think it's true. I wish it was true. It's not observed. They're saying frogs and birds are related because they drew a line on paper. Do you believe frogs and birds are related?
Yes, but not because of lines on the paper. That's a summation of the data, and you're confusing that with the actual data.
So what is the actual data that would make you think a frog and a bird are related? They got them right next to each other here.
Well, you've already admitted 90% of my argument, which is that things can variate within their kind. And so a dog is just a variation of a mammal.
A dog is a variation of a mammal. Now, they're having a frog, a bird, and a fish coming off the same line. So could you recognize, if I handed you a frog and a bird, would you be able to tell the difference?
Yeah. And if you handed me a dinosaur and a bird, they would look very similar. In fact, they have almost identical biochemistry. They have the same type of feet. They have proven that hairs and scales and feathers all develop from the same developmental, they're called placodes. And they are all made of the same material, and they all develop from the same things.
They're all made of keratin. I'm familiar with that. Scales and hair and feathers made of keratin.
So a mutation can produce a different type of being.
Well, keratin is a great building product to build things out of. There's a whole lot of stuff made out of iron. Battleships are made out of iron, so are forks. You think battleships and forks are related?
No, because they can't reproduce. They can't have sex with each other and make more.
Adding reproduction makes it 1 trillion times more complicated, not less complicated. Just because a battleship and a fork and an automobile are all made out of iron does not prove any relationship. It proves a common building material. The designer who designed the bird and who have feathers, which are made out of a feather, is complicated. Look at one under the magnifying glass. It's made of keratin, a great building product. So are scales, so are hairs, I understand. But you're saying that proves a relationship. No, it proves a common designer. Somebody used the same building material to build it. That's all.
It doesn't prove either way, but what it does demonstrate is that slight changes between them can lead to the differences that we actually see. And there's no indication that, see, you can't point to a difference between a creation event and a variation event. Are there millions and millions of different creation events? Because there are different types of bird feet, and there are different types of bird feathers. What's the difference between a bird that has adapted from another bird and all the different bird types that God has supposedly created specially?
Yeah, I don't know how many kinds of birds God made. It might have been 100 kinds of birds. And today they've diversified into 5,000 varieties of birds.
How can you tell the difference between a diversification and a creation?
That's a hard one. And I'm not asking for my theory to be taught at public expense. But I think there are people working on that. I think most of it's intuitive to a 5-year-old. If you put a Chihuahua and a Great Dane, they would say it's the same kind of animal. If you put a Chihuahua and a banana, they would say it's not.
We don't ask 5-year-olds for their opinions on complex science, though.
No, but that's where they teach it to the 5-year-olds, that they put stuff like this in their books, and the kid sees the picture and thinks a frog and a bird are related, came from an amoeba or protista. This is the propaganda machine you guys are running, and I think it's evil, absolutely evil. You're destroying the faith of young children by this stupidity and these lies. There is no proof any bird has ever produced a non-bird or came from a non-bird. There is no evidence any frog has ever come from a non-frog. None. You can believe it if you want, but it's not science.
Most Christians believe in evolution, and most people who believe and study evolution are Christians. So there is no assault on the faith at all.
Well, the majority opinion means nothing. That's obviously a logical fallacy. We don't care. The majority opinion in the South thought slavery was fine 150 years ago.
Right, but what I'm saying is that Christians can believe in evolution. Teaching evolution does not destroy Christians, does not destroy faith in Christianity.
Well, they're certainly not a Bible-believing Christian. The Bible clearly teaches God made everything in 6 days. Do you believe everything was created in 6 days?
Well, everyone has different interpretations. Some people believe some parts of the Bible are literal, and they believe that other parts are metaphorical, and there are stories that contain lessons that aren't meant to be literal, and that is a lot of Christians. And that's a typical Christian belief.
Yeah, tell them to give me a call. I'll be glad to straighten them out, because they're certainly not following what the Bible says. Jesus said the creation of Adam was the beginning. Matthew 19:4, Mark 10:6. Was Jesus lying? Was he mistaken? Was he stupid? Or could he have been right? Was the creation of Adam the beginning? That's what Jesus said.
I don't know, but would a Christian say that it's important to believe that part, or to believe that Jesus is their personal savior?
Well, they would have a different Jesus than I have. The Mexican baseball player's named Jesus. Just because, if there's someone says Jesus claimed the creation of Adam was the beginning. So if they don't believe that part, why should they believe the part where he said, I can, forgive your sins and take you to heaven? What would
because they still believe in the teachings of Jesus that are love and forgiveness, and that he is the divine Son of God. Those are the important parts of Christianity.
Well, I think there's a lot more to it than that. If you could find, is there any book then that the Christians are supposed to follow? We're getting way off topic.
Well, that's why there's so many Christian sects, because they disagree on slight details, but they're all still Christians.
I know they should call me, because I'm the only one that's right on all that stuff, and they should. I'll straighten them out.
The only one.
And I think that's a good point to end that
okay.
topic off. If we want to go back to the topic of the mechanisms, go ahead, gentlemen.
So I have another paper, talking about antibiotic resistance, and also detailing the mutations that happened after that mutation, which also raised its fitness levels. If you want to go into the actual experiments. Can you hear me?
I hear you. Yes. Are you asking me a question? No.
Yeah. Do you want to go into that level of detail, or talk about the definition of kinds? Because I still have a bone to pick with that, or new information I think would be probably the most productive.
I think you guys are frantically searching for anything to offer, scientific support for your religion. You believe whales and tomatoes are related. You really believe that. That's okay. I don't care. You believe birds and frogs are related, and they came from a protista. I know you believe that. You believe it very strongly. And you're looking for evidence of that. And the best evidence you've been able to come up with is a single-celled creature becoming resistant to some kind of bacteria, some kind of antibiotic, some kind of drug.
Well, that's a misrepresentation of what I used that for. I used that to address your claim that there are no beneficial mutations.
So you believe that one beneficial, what you think is a beneficial mutation, that added, let's see, what were your words here? It raised the fitness level. Let's take an organism most people would be more familiar with, like the human body. Probably everybody listening has one of those. What can you give of an example of anything that has raised the fitness level through mutations in humans?
The ability to drink milk. Some humans do not have this gene, and humans that live in places with high elevation with cows, they've all evolved this gene.
So the people who live in high elevations with cows have evolved the ability to drink milk. Is that what you're saying?
Whereas other humans have not.
Well, I was born and raised at low elevation, Illinois, which is only like 800 feet above sea level, and I love milk. I've been drinking it all my life. So
yeah, but we're talking about evolutionary history, not modern day humans.
So you believe humans evolved the ability to drink milk? Is that what you're saying?
Some humans do not have this gene that creates an enzyme that can digest milk.
I'm familiar with that. And so the ability to drink milk or not, to digest milk or not, after being weaned, okay, is you're claiming that's a mutation, and that it's a beneficial mutation. Is that an example?
Yeah.
So what did it add?
There are also humans who have HIV-resistant genes.
HIV-resistant gene from sickle cell anemia, are you talking about?
No.
So
that would be for malaria.
Oh, yeah, malaria, okay. So a detrimental disease like sickle cell anemia or malaria or any of them, if somebody has a resistance to that disease, that's evidence of a mutation that may humans come from non-humans, we came from a protista?
Well, it is a difference in the biochemistry, and as far as we know, biochemistry is determined by your genes. And this gene has been isolated.
We've got 5 minutes left for the discussion, guys. 5 minutes. Thanks.
All right. And the genes that you're talking about, are they themselves like complex, or are they simple? Is a gene simple or is it complex?
In a difference in a single protein, I believe. It doesn't really matter if it's complex or simple. It's new information either way.
So if a computer code, let's say Microsoft PowerPoint, has how many lines of code? Steve, how many lines of code in Microsoft PowerPoint? Hundreds of thousands, okay? If we had a change in one of those lines of code, if something happened, my computer was zapped or x-rayed or something like that, and it upset the code of Microsoft PowerPoint, the chances of that being a beneficial change are, I'd say, real close to zero. Certainly there would be billions of times more likely to be negative.
All you need is one that works. As long as it's above zero, then that will be selected for. All the ones that don't work can just get thrown in the trash. And they actually have designed computer programs that do this to them. They become more efficient.
Well, I'm sure you realize this line of thinking leads straight to Adolf Hitler. Let's find the more advanced ones and throw the other ones in the trash, the ones that don't have this beneficial mutation.
But we don't do that. We're just studying how nature does that.
Sure. Well, the title was, do the mechanisms of evolution have limits? I think they do. The ones you mentioned, the best ones you could come up with, are still a protista or a bacteria. They're limited, obviously. It didn't change to any other obvious kind of creature. Now, you believe that this change that happened, this resistance to drugs, can somehow accumulate to make that eventually, over millions of years, turn into an elephant or a mosquito or a butterfly. That's not science. I'm trying to get you to see it. I don't understand why you don't.
I understand what you're saying, but
really?
Yeah, that's not a limit. That's just a change. So the limit would be, is there the accumulation of those small changes? So like, is a change between a single-celled organism, a single-celled algae, and a multicellular algae, does that meet your criteria for a change from one organism to the other, one kind?
I guess I'd have to have it shown to me that this two-celled algae is actually not just cooperation between two cells, a colony, rather than an actual new creature.
Well, it is. The two-celled ones are, but then there are multicellular ones that evolved from the two cells.
I think you'd find most biologists would strongly disagree with you on what you just said. Now, you believe that. Somebody may have taught you that. But even that, with a cell, which is incredibly complex, learning to work together with another cell is designed beyond comprehension. I mean, that takes brain power. That just doesn't happen. That's like getting two computers to work with each other, solving a problem. I suppose that could be done. Multiple computers.
I could claim that. But just theoretically, if that could be demonstrated, would that satisfy your goalpost?
I think if we could demonstrate that two cells have accumulated, or two individual cells have bonded to become a two-celled creature, that would be interesting. I'd like to study that out. Is it then going to survive? I don't think there are any examples of it where it survives in nature, or it even happens in nature. They might force it to happen in a laboratory someplace. I suppose you could weld the front end off a motorcycle on the back end of a car and make a tricycle out of it. It took a designer to do that. So I don't think that the title of the debate was, do the mechanisms of evolution have limits? I think I've clearly demonstrated, and you've clearly demonstrated, yes, they have limits. You've not shown any idea or even a theory how a protista can turn to a human. You show a protista becoming a protista resistant to drugs. I know you believe these small changes will accumulate, but if only one change out of a billion is beneficial, then those other billion have to die. Now that one beneficial one has to get another beneficial one.
That's why it's slow.
That's why you got to
observe that. We observe that. You admit that. We've proven it in the labs, and you just don't like the time scale.
I don't like the time scale or the mechanism. It doesn't work. It doesn't happen. We don't see accumulation of these mutations. We don't see it. Every farmer will tell you they try to accumulate the mutations where their cows produce more milk or more beef. They try. They select. They artificially select for this. which is much faster than natural selection. They artificially select, trying to get, let's take a dog, a smaller dog, okay? But they still get a dog.
But they're not trying to get a different, they're not trying to make it not a cow.
Okay, could you, with artificial selection, crossbreed dogs and get a non-dog? Do you think you'll ever be able to get a non-dog from any amount of time?
Time.
Could you turn a dog to a cat?
Closing.
Okay, guys, awesome back and forth. Thanks so much, Dr. Hovind. Thanks so much, Taylor. That was a blast. What we're going to do now is move into the quick closing statements, just to sum everything up. I think because Snake started, we'll start with you, then Dr. Hovind. Then we've got time. Let me see here for a 10-minute Q&A. So go ahead there, Snake.
Okay, how much do I have?
3 minutes.
Okay. So real quick, the reason evolution is taught in schools is because we actually, or the scientific body, scientists who deal in the mainstream science actually produce cures, and creationism does not. So even if we're wrong, that's the reason it's taught. And I started out this debate saying, of course, there are limits. That, you know, you can't just keep increasing the size of a thing infinitely. But what I wanted to focus on was the fact that even creationists accept that there are small changes, and these do accumulate, and they do accumulate beneficially. And so it doesn't matter how many bad mutations you get, because those will just die. What matters is the beneficial ones, and those are the ones that stick around. And I have demonstrated that there are beneficial mutations, even though I suspect Kent will go back to just saying that there are none. So all you need is, so what is the limit of the changes in biochemistry? We do observe that there are changes to the biochemistry in cells, specifically asking about whether a single cell to a multicellular, if that could be demonstrated, would that meet Kent's goalposts? And he did not want to answer yes or no. I suspect so he can, because that would satisfy what he's asking, but his faith would prevent him from actually accepting it. So what happens there is a single gene changing the way that the different cells communicate with each other. And that's been observed in an experiment. So my question is, what is the limit to these small biochemical changes, which, if they did over millions of years, would produce very different organisms, even if you're going to call them all the same kind, which scientists kind of do. We call them all eukaryotes if we're talking about, you know, what is the limit there? He just kind of says, of course there's a limit. And the limit is the kind. I'm not seeing any mechanism for that change or for that limit, because each generation produces different information, which is then selected for against in different ways according to the environment. And it doesn't matter if it's artificial or not. And I think you're kind of blurring the lines there between artificial and natural when humans inhabit these artificial spaces, and then we also have pathogens that infect us. Well, is that a natural or is that an artificial environment? Well, that's what they live in.
Did he say time?
All right. Yeah, that was time.
Well, good. Well, thank you for doing this. The reason communism is taught in North Korean schools is because everybody believes in it, and anybody who doesn't believe in it doesn't have a right to live. I mean, so of course it has to be true because all the teachers are teaching it, and all the universities believe it, all the books, everything published in the newspaper supports communism. That's proof that communism works, I mean, because everybody believes in it in North Korea. You know, the reason Islam is taught and that Muhammad was a prophet, the reason that's taught in Iran is because everybody believes it, therefore it has to be true. So everybody should be forced to teach that, you know, Islam in the Iranian schools because it has to be true, because that's the only thing that's taught. This is the logic you guys are using. Of course, evolution has to be true because that's all the majority teach it. I agree, our education system has been co-opted and corrupted by this evolution religion. It is, you guys have won the war in taking over the educational system. It's all through the textbooks, okay? Evolution, here we go. The butterfly and the spider and the elephant are related to a common ancestor. You guys have won the war by deception of getting your religion taught by everybody in all the school system. But it's not science. Nobody's ever demonstrated any animal producing a different kind. You have a great imagination. The limit is your imagination. In your mind, you think, wow, this can happen. Well, it's like a kid thinking, wow, I can fly if I put my underwear on the outside of my pants and paint it red. You know, I can fly and I have superpowers. It's imagination. It's not true. It's not observed. All we've ever observed in all of humanity is dogs produce dogs, cows produce cows. There are no exceptions to that. Nobody's ever, no, they've even tried to make it happen. Try to turn the dog into a non-dog. Or can you turn the bacteria into a non-bacteria? You claiming it's got new information and drug resistance, it's still a bacteria. Can you, even in the laboratory, force it to become something non-bacteria? I don't think you can. I don't think anybody ever has. See, science is something that deals with things we can observe, study, and test. We observe dogs produce dogs. You imagine dogs came from a protista. That's not science. And I, for one, am sick and tired. You say the reason it's taught is because, you know, that's what everybody believes. That's majority opinion argument. They could do that in North Korea or Iran or any totalitarian system. Okay, well, the limit is, obviously there are mechanical limits, there are chemical limits, there are observational limits. Nobody's ever seen this. Could we get a frog that could jump 3 feet? Maybe. Could we get a frog that could jump 5 miles? No. There's a limit. You guys will not admit there are limits. Anyway, I enjoy doing these. You can check our website, drdino.com, or visit our Dinosaur Adventureland. We got a bunch of people working here today at Dinosaur Adventureland in the roaring metropolis of Lenox, Alabama. And watch our YouTube channel, Kent Hovind Official, where we want to help strengthen your faith in the Word of God. Snake, you're going to stand before God one day, whether you believe it or not. I want to tell you, Jesus loves you. He died for you on the cross. He's willing to forgive you if you'd like. If you don't want to, okay, you go face God any way you want. I don't want to face God with a list of my sins. I want him to say, you're forgiven. You can have the same thing. Give me a call sometime, extension 3, Dr. 855 Big Dino. I'll lead you to Jesus right over the phone. Thanks so much.
All right, 9-minute Q&A now, guys. So I think Standing for Truth has been compiling questions. So.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we got time for just a few questions here. Thanks again, gentlemen, for a lively discussion. And always thanks for giving us your time for these debates. I'll get right into it then. I'll start with a question for Snake. Snake, this question is from Landon Freeman. What levels of biological intelligence and intricacy would cause you to doubt that they evolved through naturalistic means?
If there was some sort of specific purpose to the things, it doesn't seem, I don't think there is really. I don't think complexity is a convincing argument for design. I think if you showed me a creation event, then I would believe it. But complexity, I already know that there are systems that complexity that emerges from natural processes interacting. So the closest you could get me to do is just kind of temporarily doubt for a specific process. If it was extremely complex, I'm thinking of, you know, how would you distinguish between a machine and a life form? And it's hard to pin down, but I think there's a reason in the clock analogy, like finding a stopwatch on the beach. There's a reason people point to the watch and not the sand. See, the sand is also a complex structure that has formed from natural processes. No one can point to a sand particle and say that was obviously designed, but you can point to a watch and say that it's obviously designed. And partially that's because we know where watches come from. We already have that knowledge. But I think you could find some sort of criteria based on its purpose or function as an inanimate object. So a watch doesn't do anything except for the designer and for people who purchase it. Otherwise, it doesn't do anything. It just decays. So if you found self-replicating, I think that would be
okay, awesome. And I think for these questions, we can allow a few second response from the other participant, the other debater on both sides, unless you want to just move on to the next.
I'd just like to say sand itself is incredibly complex. If you look at most of its quartz, I think a large percentage of it is quartz. Look at the quartz, the way the molecules line up with each other, the way the atoms of even quartz and sand, silicon oxide, each atom has electrons whizzing around. Do they ever get tired? Is this perpetual motion? Do the electrons ever get tired? Have they been whizzing around for billions of years with just the design of an atom? Ought to say, wow, there's a designer. To think that a quartz crystal or a piece of sand, start with a jar of nothing and make a grain of sand. Let me see you make a grain of sand from nothing. Just one grain. We got mountains of it here on our property. It's an old gravel pit. Sand is complex. Now, a watch, way beyond sand. But sand is indeed incredibly complex. So I think the arguments had to be a designer, even of sand. I can look at this ink pen and say, there's different parts to this pen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably 10 different parts. All of them designed to fit into each other to work to make an ink pen. I'd be a fool to say this pen happened by chance for no reason. I think you're a fool to say the human body happened by chance for no reason. It's way more complicated than an ink pen, and this we would all recognize as impossible. And your argument that ink pens don't reproduce, I think, is insane to say that because that's going to add complexity to the problem, not subtract it. But anyway, you believe what you want.
Well, I don't say there are no reasons.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen, for your answers. So next question is for Dr. Hovind. This one asks, some evolutionists say gene duplication can add new information resulting in limitless changes. Is this true?
I don't think it's ever been demonstrated that a mutation adds new information. It scrambles existing information. If I scrambled up English letters in a sentence, could I ever make a Chinese word? No. You're never going to make a Chinese word with English letters. You're not going to add any new information by scrambling existing information. At least it's never been observed. You can imagine it if you want. That's all they do is imagine it. It's evolution is SpongeBob religion is all it is. It's hilarious that people believe it. Grown men really believe that stuff. I find it hilarious.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for that answer, Dr. Hovind. We've got this question for, let me see here. This one,
sure.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So a scrambling of information is still new information. I don't understand where this argument is. And some of the scrambles will actually confer a different meaning. Like I have a whole list of sentences that you can do that to. Just so with a single word, you can replace a letter and it'll just be a different word. So new sequences are new information.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen. So this question here is for Snake. Isn't your lactose and HIV examples just epigenetic regulation and not actual addition of genes or information? Go ahead.
I'm not sure about the lactose, but I don't think so because it's actually an enzyme is produced, so that wouldn't be epigenetic. As far as HIV resistance goes, that is also a protein that's produced. But epigenetic changes are still changes in information.
Okay, are you done with that question then?
Yeah, unless there was another part to it.
Nope, that's it. Unless Dr. Hovind has a follow-up, I can go on to the last question.
No, go ahead. I think it's obvious these changes are limited and that nobody's ever observed it produce any new information that then takes over the population. Because now you got to get not only the male getting the new information, but the female. And the problems are multitude for his belief. I do admire his faith, though. Go ahead.
Okay, this is the last question. It is directed at Snake, therefore, if Dr. Hovind wants to respond as well, and then that will conclude the question and answer. So this question is from Nephilim Free, and he also put a clarification here. So I'll read it word for word. If information, algorithms, and linguistics are present in DNA, and if information, algorithms, and linguistics originate only from intelligence, wouldn't that be empirical evidence that all life is designed? And his clarification is, notice I am not asking whether or not you believe DNA actually possesses information, algorithms, and linguistics. I only want to know if their presence in DNA would prove DNA is a product of intelligence. Go ahead, Snake.
So I just wanted to clarify that the human resistance to HIV is due to a gene deletion. As for Nephilim's question about linguistics and DNA, I did make a video response to his challenge on that. I don't know if he saw that, but essentially have a stop codon, a start codon, and up and down regulation are not linguistic properties. So I don't see any linguistic properties in DNA, and even if there were, that doesn't, some kind of algorithm does not indicate a design, because we already see natural processes. They all work according to algorithms. But again, that you can assume that the entire universe and even the first cell were created by God. That doesn't say anything about the process of evolution. Yeah. I think, was there a second part of that question?
No, he was just, the second part was more so just a clarification of what he was asking, unless you have something to respond to, Dr. Hovind.
No, that's great. I think his statement that HIV was a gene deletion is interesting. That's like saying, you know, if they're handcuffing everybody to haul them to prison, but somebody's born with no arms, you can't be handcuffed. Oh, that's beneficial. No, it's not. It's beneficial for the moment, maybe, but in the long term, it's a loss of information. That's what I said at the beginning. Even the HIV example he gave was a loss of information, not a gain. His claim was that the mechanism that powers evolution is a gain of new information. He didn't give one. So I agree. DNA has algorithms. DNA is mind-boggling in its complexity. It can't happen by chance. They can believe it if they want, but that's not science. It's SpongeBob.
No one claims it happens by chance, except for creationists.
So these mutations happen on purpose?
The mutations happen by chance, but selection is not chance. The environment is not chance.
But the mutations happen by chance. So the new information comes by chance, is what you're saying, and then natural selection selects that one to be better, to survive.
It's a random production of new information, and yeah, so that's the whole process of evolution is not random.
I would say it's a random process of scrambling information, and most of them, when the information is scrambled too badly, they don't survive even to be conceived, let alone born or grow up and reproduce. So if the information...
You'd need 100% for your claims to hold water, because if even one makes it through, then that's a change.
Well, the odds of one improved one are 1 in 100 trillion or whatever it is. But again, you got to have two of the opposite sex in the same place at the same time. What if the male and female evolved this difference, but they're 50 miles away and they never find each other, or one's 30 years earlier and they never find each other?
That's also a misconception. You could gene with only one parent.
No, the new improved gene has to be passed on through either asexual or sexual reproduction. So yeah, you got. I think you got.
Only one parent requires that gene.
I'm sorry, what?
Only one parent requires that gene to show up in the child.
So is it possible if one parent had a beneficial mutation that it would be lost in the next generation because it was, the child gets the dominant and recessive characteristics? Can the recessive one ever be simply weeded out? of
Yeah,
the
it
population.
happens all the time, but there are also dominant genes.
There you go. Thank
the
you,
other
sir.
way.
Time. Sorry, guys. I was a little late. I just let it keep going.
Okay, well, thanks so much again, gentlemen. That was a great debate. Thanks for giving us your time, Snake and Dr. Hovind. Unless you guys want to say just a couple words in goodbye, maybe advertise your channels, we can call it a day.
Yeah, what's your channel, Snake, and what's your goal? What are you trying to do with this channel?
I was trying to essentially explore science, explore critical thinking. I've touched on politics a little bit, but right now I'm kind of focused on creationism, and I've done a flat Earth thing. I saw Kent's flat Earth video. I thought that was pretty funny.
Okay.
Maybe I'll call in and we'll talk about you know, how the similarities between flat Earth and creationism sometime.
I think we should talk about the similarities between flat Earth and evolution. That's where the similarities come in.
I don't see a single one.
I'm sure you don't. No, I'll help you see them. Thank you for joining us. Come down and visit us, Dinosaur Adventureland in Lennox. I got a group of kids out there helping right now. I got to get back to them. So let's do it again anytime. You guys at Standing for Truth, keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. Okay, guys, everybody have a great day. See you later.
All right.